The new map gave the Jews their own land in the north, with the British retaining the area around Jerusalem. Fearing that their country was about to be carved up, violence again flared in the region. In 1937, al-Husseini was deposed as president of the Supreme Muslim Council by the British authorities, and the Arab Higher Committee was declared illegal.
Unrest in Palestine. Suspecting that the Higher Committee had incited Arab leaders to start a holy war against the British government, police swooped on the secret headquarters of assassins and rebels. Many arrests were made. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, head of the Muslim Supreme Council, was deprived of office. The frontiers are guarded with special vigilance. All roads leading to Jerusalem patrolled. The British government is determined to stamp out terrorism.
Warrants for the arrest of the leaders of the committee were issued. After 3 months in hiding, he fled the country and began a tortuous journey that would end at the very heart of the Nazi regime.
He's staying in Syria, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. Foremost in the Palestine-Arab trouble, he eluded the British and escaped from the Mosque of Omar.
Now in exile in Syria, he continued to direct the war against the British. But British troop numbers were too small to crush the revolt. Strikes, sabotage, assassinations, and the guerrilla warfare went on without let-up. The British military presence was small in comparison to the Palestinian Arab forces. They were being overrun. But then Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain found a new way of freeing up extra troops. He signed a deal with Hitler, giving him part of Czechoslovakia. Allegedly, this made Europe safe from the threat of war. But then in May 1939, the British government did an amazing U-turn. With Europe now back on the verge of war, they realized that they simply did not have enough men and machines to defend the Suez Canal and the precious oil fields of Iraq and Persia, as well as fighting Arab rebels in Palestine. Arab public opinion in the Middle East needed to be appeased. So they produced a paper calling for strict limits on Jewish immigration and the creation of an independent Palestine by 1949. Here was an offer that seemed to give al-Husseini and his freedom fighters everything they'd asked for.
The 1939 White Paper was seen by many Palestinian nationalists, including some radical nationalists, as a real achievement of the fight that has been waged by the Palestinians ever since the start of the revolt, the Great Revolt in 1936.
It was a sharp curtailment of Jewish immigration that was going to be limited to 75,000 over the following 5 years. And also a commitment that in 10 years' time there would be an independent Palestinian state.
They really saw in the White Paper the outcome of these years of struggle and the very high cost that they had to pay for that in lives and in repression and all that.
This was a real chance for the Mufti to get what he wanted. Such was his hatred of the British that he dismissed their efforts to attempt to win him over. He rejected the White Paper's recommendations, and he went much further. He called for an end to the British mandate in Palestine. He wanted the British out and the creation of a single Arab state. The forces that propel him to collaborate with the Nazis were now inevitable.
He had his own selfish personal ambitions above any considerations of the real interest of his people and the movement. I'm saying that because, again, nationalist leaders of the Palestinians considered that the white paper should have been accepted, and at the time were in favor of expressing approval of the white paper and seeing in the white paper a victory of the movement.
Now the Grand Mufti was effectively at war with the British, and he desperately needed allies. He gave a clear indication of who they might be. Al-Husseini was quoted as saying, "What do we care who backs us, or who we align ourselves with, as long as it helps us to attain our goals? We have a common enemy, the British and the Jews." As the war began in Europe, Al-Husseini's deteriorating relationship with the Syrian authorities forced him to move on from his base in Damascus. This time, he made for the Kingdom of Iraq. In Baghdad, he continued his political agitating, and in 1941 was involved in an anti-British revolt. From his base in Iraq, he issued a fatwa for a holy war against Britain. But just days later, British troops invaded Iraq, and Al-Husseini was forced to move on yet again. This time, he made for fascist Italy, where he met with the country's dictator, Benito Mussolini. Whilst in Italy, the Grand Mufti prepared a declaration confirming his support for the Axis powers. He was officially declaring his allegiance to the Nazis and their supporters. Within days, it had been sent to the German embassy in Rome. And on the 6th of November 1941, the Grand Mufti entered Berlin for the first time to meet directly with German officials.
When the Mufti arrived, he was, of course, greeted by many Nazi officials, especially those who were in touch already with him and in charge of operations in the Middle East, the political and strategic operations of Nazi Germany in the Middle East. But he, of course, requested to meet the Führer. He believed that his own stature meant that he had to meet in person the chief of the Nazis. The Hitler was not very much enthused about this idea of meeting a person like that.
Although reluctant to meet in person with the Grand Mufti, Hitler was told by his advisors that it might be useful in convincing him to help Germany win over the Arab population of the Middle East. So on November the 28th, 1941, the Grand Mufti was ushered into a private room in Hitler's chancellery. Surrounded by Nazi dignitaries, he finally met the Führer. It wasn't a long meeting, but al-Husseini appeared to get what he so desperately wanted.
Hitler was saying, give me some time, let us develop our military strategy, and when we'll be in the military position of dominating this part of the world, we will fulfill your desires of independence. But until then, I have political considerations, so you have to, accept my pledge, and that's it. And this was the only meeting Hitler ever gave the Mufti.
The deal was pretty clear. While the Nazis stopped short of actually recognizing an independent Palestine, Hitler was planning to deal with the Jews who'd settled in the country. And so began the Mufti's 4-year-long relationship with the Nazis. Throughout his time in Germany during the Second World War, al-Husseini appeared to enjoy a close working relationship with some of the highest-ranking Nazis. In the Grand Mufti's memoirs, published in 1999, he freely discusses his close relationship with SS Chief Heinrich Himmler, the man who was the architect of the extermination of the Jews. According to his own account, he often met Himmler for tea. On one such occasion, the Grand Mufti had his photograph taken with him. It contains a signed dedication from Himmler to His Eminence the Grand Mufti, a memento. This wasn't the only exchange of gifts between Mohammed al-Husseini and the Nazi leaders. The Grand Mufti even went to such lengths as having a Persian rug specially made for the Führer himself. From his bureau in Berlin, he also planned a series of radio broadcasts to the Middle East. His first came in December 1941, and he continued to broadcast throughout the entire war. But then his involvement with the Nazis became deeper and darker. In 1942, Himmler's deputy Reinhard Heydrich convened a meeting of Nazi officials who met here at Wannsee, near Berlin. At the meeting, the Nazi hierarchy launched their project to deal with the millions of Jews in Europe. They rubber-stamped the plan which became known as the final solution to the Jewish problem. It meant the systematic rounding up of Jews and their extermination in death camps all over Europe. So what did the Grand Mufti really know of the Nazis' plans?
The Mufti, as he himself acknowledged very clearly in his memoirs, was perfectly aware of the genocide. He was perfectly aware of the fact that the Nazis were perpetrating a genocide of European Jews. He tells himself in his memoir the story of his encounter in July 1943 with Himmler, during which Himmler told him that Germany was in the process of exterminating the Jews and had already killed 3 million of them.